The last quarterly labour force survey shows that 35.3% of adults are unemployed in the country, but some experts arguing that South Africa's unemployment survey, or should I say statistics, have become skewed. They believe that Stats SA really needs to put funds together and conduct door-to-door surveys. They say telephone sampling is complicated. Joining me now is the UCT Professor of Economics and Director of Open Access Data Service, that's DataFirst, Martin Wittenberg. Professor, good morning to you. Thank you very much for your time. What do you find to be problematic about the statistics that come from Stats SA?
So I think we have to understand that the labour force statistics were designed to be done by a household survey. So that's how it's been done over the last 2.5 decades. So that means that people go to dwellings, they speak to the people living there, and then they enumerate who's employed, who's unemployed, what sort of wages they're getting, where they're working. Now, the big problem that happened during lockdown was that that was no longer possible. So the surveys are designed to be done in person in the field, but what they had to do was to switch to telephone sampling. And they did that 2 years ago, and they used telephone numbers that they had on file collected in the first quarter of 2020.
Yeah.
Now, we can immediately see where there's going to be a problem. Firstly, they didn't have telephone numbers for everybody. So, and that's just how it is. And what you can try to do is adjust for that. So you can say, well, the people who don't have telephones are going to be different from those that do. So they're going to be different in terms of incomes, in terms of where they're working, all of those kind of things, where they live. And Stats South Africa did do what they call a bias adjustment on that. But that is all based on modeling. So basically you're making some assumptions to try and correct for the fact that you're not seeing everybody, and you're only seeing a subset of the people that you saw beforehand. So that was already a problem 2 years ago when they switched to telephone sampling.
Yeah.
But telephone sampling is worse when you look at it over time, because the problem is that basically people change numbers, so now you can't get hold of them anymore, and they may refuse to pick up. And so what we've seen, if we just look at the sort of published statistics, is that the response rates to the interviews have continued to go down. And you can't refresh the sample. So if you're going house to house, if you have exhausted people, they get tired, they don't want to talk to you anymore, you can draw a new sample. And refreshing it, if all that you've got are telephone numbers, becomes very hard. So I think that there are objective problems. So this is not of Stats South Africa's making. That was due to the lockdown. But all of that becomes much harder in a situation also where the budget's been cut.
Yeah.
So Stats South Africa's budget got cut when the Treasury had to find money to pay for the last promise of Zuma, which was free tertiary education. So Stats South Africa had a whole lot of money taken off its budget then. So you're also sitting in a situation where it's just the money that's available for Stats South Africa to do a good job is just not there in the way that it was, let's say, 5 years ago.
Yeah, you've mentioned a number of points, Professor, and I'm going to try and keep the conversation as basic in terms of me understanding exactly what you are saying is the problem here. So let's deal with the element of public trust as a first instance. Can South Africans trust the statistics that are coming out of Stats SA based on what you have just said, therefore, very briefly?
So I think that's a hard one because so even at the best of times, you know that when you're looking at sample data, that that there's a problem because I mean by design you're not looking at everybody, you're taking a sample, and you want that sample to be representative of the population. So when you get sample data, you should always be a little bit distrustful because, you know, that's just how sampling works. But as I said, it's much more of a big problem if you don't have the same procedures in place to try and keep things as representative as possible. So telephone sampling, I think, is more problematic than in-person sampling for that reason.
Yeah.
And then when people get tired, you know, so Stats South Africa hasn't been able to talk to new people. Normally they refresh the sample periodically. If people just say, look, you know, I've spoken to you now every quarter for the last 2 years, I don't want to talk to you anymore, that's going to skew the results also. So yes, I think in the current environment we have to be much more cautious about the data that's coming out. And as I said, that's just how things are with telephone sampling.
Prof, this conversation can get very complicated, I'm realizing, as I ask you these questions. This is a body that we understand in the country is in charge of bringing official statistics here. And with the unemployment rate, for example, that I've just quoted to you, if that could potentially be questioned, as you suggest, that means that things can get very, very complicated. Let's talk about Stats SA, which, based on the literature I've been reading, has suggested that they are returning to the field. But it's complicated still, is it not? Because people are less trusting given the levels of crime in the country, and therefore that calls on the questions about the collection of this data. What else can Stats SA do to give a much more realistic picture when they do provide these stats, collection methods?
Yeah, so I think that that obviously the more general trust breaks down in the country. So I mean, we've seen last year, you know, the whole insurrection in July. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of distrust. That will affect data gathering without a doubt. You know, basically people see, oh, you're from the government. You know, do I want to talk to you? Yes or no? The real problem, of course, is that we have no choice. We need the information. So there's no way that we can fix any of the problems if we don't even understand how big they are and who's affected. So to some extent, we need the data to address the problems. But while they're the problems, you know, the quality of the data can affect it. So it's a little bit of a vicious circle, and Stats South Africa can't do that by itself. So they have a job to do, but they're obviously only one part of this big picture. And the other thing that has happened, not just now, but has happened over the last 2 decades, is that politicians are very happy to shoot the messenger. So if Stats South Africa produces figures that some politician doesn't like, they will immediately say, oh, well, it's because it's Stats South Africa's fault. It's not a fault in the way in which the country works or in the way in which data is gathered in general.
Yeah.
It's easiest to attack the messenger who's giving you the bad numbers, kind of like. And that then makes it much harder also for people then to go and get quality information. If people become suspicious of the people who are doing it.
Yeah, and
I think that's not a short-term problem that we can fix. But I mean, the one thing that we can fix is to make sure that Stats South Africa does actually have the resources to do that. And unfortunately, it's not a little bit like you can cut money 5 years ago. You've really put this the squeeze on Stats South Africa for 3-4 years. They've had job freezes. They couldn't promote people. They've had staff working under tremendous pressure, and a lot of people left. So now you will give them money to do the job, but their capacity is not where it was 5 years ago. So it's like all institutions in South Africa. It's a little bit you can't turn the taps on and off. Once you've done some damage to an institution, it's going to take some while to fix. But yes, there's a lot of things that need to be fixed. And for a start, Stats South Africa does need to draw on resources around them. So they do. There are academics. There are other people who willing to help, but it's easiest to do that if you have a set of discussions that don't point fingers and blame. Saying basically, these data are rubbish and we can't believe them. But if they're really trying to understand the problem and constructively look at how do we fix it.
Professor, I'm out of time. I have to ask this question as someone who has been monitoring the space at Stats SA very closely. Around the budgetary issues, you seemed to point to a particular administration, and that was the administration before this one, the Zuma administration. Is that how far back the money issues or the resources issues stem, or would you say they continue with the current administration? Simple question is there a commitment from the current government to fund this institution adequately? Because we need it.
So I don't think that there is enough of a commitment to fund it adequately. So I know that they have actually provided resources sort of at fairly last minute for things like the census. But that's also not the most helpful way of actually dealing with things, because then you're always in a scramble. So suddenly you realize that you have the money. The whole thing that the government did 2 decades ago was introduce these medium-term budget frameworks where you had money for 3 years, so you can plan. That theoretically still happens, but in practice that seems to have gone out of the window. So basically, come the budget time, they cut and they redistribute. So I think that a lot of the ministries do not have longer-term planning horizons. And for something like Stats South Africa, you actually need that. You can't plan a survey in 2-3 months. You need to know well before that you have the money to do a decent job.
Right.
If you suddenly give me the money and say, get me the data tomorrow, I mean, you can try and spend it, but you're actually not going to get the quality product that you're looking for.